Hello and good afternoon, and welcome to the RTPI Yorkshire Online Events 2020 series. I'm Becky Eads, Head of Development Services at City of York Council and part of the RTPI Yorkshire Regional Activities Committee. I'm delighted for today's webinar on a planning system fit for the 21st century, where I'm joined by Victoria Hills, the Chief Executive of the RTPI, along with currently 85 online attendees. The webinar will start with a presentation from Victoria, followed by a number of questions from the RTPI Yorkshire. And after this, there'll be the opportunity for a question and answer session. Questions can be submitted through the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen at any time during the event. We will do our best to get through as many as possible. After the event, you will be emailed a survey. It would be really useful if you could spend a couple of minutes to complete and return the form. There are a number of upcoming RTPI Yorkshire events which can be found on the RTPI events webpage. The next event is a webinar, Learning from Hamburg, Lessons from UK Planners from one of Europe's most dynamic cities, on November the 15th. We also have the RTPI Yorkshire Planning Excellence Awards live on YouTube on Tuesday the 17th of November at 1 p.m. Please book your place as soon as possible if you wish to attend. I'm now going to hand you over to Victoria, who's going to do a presentation for us. Thank you very much. Thanks, Victoria.
Well, thank you, Becky, and thank you to you and all of the Regional Management Board, Regional Activities Committee for the invitation to come and speak at one of your regional webinars. And, you know, firstly, I'm just really blown away by the amount of people that are on this for a regional event. It's got to be one of the most well attended that I think I've been to yet. This year we're nearly nudging 100 at the moment, so thank you to all of you for making your post lunch slot available to come and listen. Banging in the background there, Becky. I don't know if you're on mute or not, but there we go. That's great. So I'm the Chief Executive of the Royal Town Planning Institute. Hopefully you're already a member watching this, but if you're not, then it's never too late. We have many routes open for you to think about joining, and lots of opportunities for you to benefit from being a member of the RTPI. And who wouldn't want to be a planner at a time like this? I've been asked to talk about a planning system fit for the 21st century. And so, of course, I want to take some time to reflect upon planning for the future, the white paper proposals for the planning reform in England, but also just to reflect on the other big kind of macro level things that are going on at the moment. Clearly, we're in a global pandemic. Many of us are well into wave 2 of this, going into various states of lockdown. As I was just saying to colleagues, this is now no longer a north-south divide. I live in the south. We're going into tier 2. So we are actually all in this together, and there are some huge challenges associated with the pandemic, but also perhaps some opportunities to look about doing things slightly differently, and we'll come back to that. But as if that wasn't enough, we are heading, it looks increasingly like, towards a hard exit of the European Union. Of course, technically we've already left, but there are a few important matters to be resolved, or not least trade deals and what all of that means for our economy. And then there are some major planning related issues for us all to contend with, not least climate change and the need to deliver on net zero. And even before the pandemic, there was already something called a housing crisis and an affordability crisis. And so I think I'm just setting the scene there for saying that planning has always been important. We know that. Many of you watching this will be planners, but it's never been more important for planning to play a huge role in addressing head on many of these challenges, and working very much together across the professions on supporting green recovery and addressing some of those big issues. So if I may, I will start firstly with the white paper. I don't have slides. I'm just going to be talking to camera. And then we are going to have sufficient time for Q&A at the end. Often on these webinars, you get to hear from somebody and then there's time for about 2 questions. And with so many of you having made the effort to turn up, I think it's only right that we put such a chunk of time, hopefully 20-25 minutes at the end, for me to help take questions. And Becky, I'm sure you can join in with that too. And my goodness, we're up to 106 now. These are great numbers. I know the Regional Management Board will be super chuffed that you've all made the effort. So the white paper. The biggest planning reform for 70 years. Well, yes, on the face of it, it is. However, perhaps when you push aside some of the rhetoric, some of the changes proposed are significant and others perhaps are a bit more incremental. And as an institute, we've been working very hard for the last 8 to 9 weeks across all 9 English regions to convene roundtables with members to talk about some of the issues and, more importantly, the questions, because there are a lot of them in the white paper that need addressing. And we've also been convening roundtable discussions with other specialist groups, such as our large major consultants group. We have had an English policy panel. We've had a PPRC policy committee discussions. And just yesterday, we had a debate with 50 of our elected members at our General Assembly. All in all, with responses we've had about 200 members actively involved in the discussions. We'll form our response 2 weeks today, I believe, is the deadline. And there are lots of people watching and waiting to see what the RTPI will say, because I know this because they're chasing me for responses now, but we are keeping our powder dry. However, I will share with you some observations that that we've got to date and some of our bigger considerations, if you like. Now, if putting the rhetoric to one side and dismissing some of the earlier statements in the white paper as just that, rhetoric, when you get to the substance of the document, I will first cover the things that we put a tick by and the things that we like. We particularly like the talking up of the profession, the acknowledgement that there is a clear role for planners and planning in the green recovery. Far from getting shot of planning or planners, it's actually talking in a very positive role about the need to get planners back to doing great work. And so, you know, notwithstanding the fact we think we already do great work, there does seem to be a focus on the profession, a focus on skills, and a focus on upskilling. And these are things that we think we can work with. We're also delighted to see a really strong focus on the local plan. We've been saying it as an institute for some time that you have to have a really strong local plan. I was just having a joke about this with the chair of the event today, Becky, of course, who, for those of you who don't know, works for York City Council, and we were having an interesting chat about local plans. Putting that to one side, the paper seems to be saying it's really important to engage communities better upstream in the local plan. Absolutely applaud that. If it's well resourced, there is a really strong role for that. Let's see far more of it. The other thing that we've got to tick by is a recognition of a chief placemaker in every authority. Our research showed that chief planners now no longer sit at a senior level in local authorities in the way that they used to, with the exception of a few. And we know that planners have those skills, the collaboration skills, and also the technical skills to work across policy areas, across investment areas, to help join the dots. So we think there's a great opportunity here for planners to stand up and be counted and say, we'd like to be that chief placemaker, please, in the local authority, sitting at the top table with the other chief officers. We also welcome the focus on quality design. We know from our member survey last year, 87% of our members feel that they feel powerless to do more on driving for quality design. I myself, in running a planning authority previously, was embroiled in just how difficult it is to reject poor design and know that you're going to win it at appeal. But having stronger policy levers at a national level and at a local level, again, if it's well resourced, reversing the hollowing out of design capability within local authorities is something we think is a good thing and something we should work with, but more importantly, make the case for that resourcing for the design champions, but also design expertise within local authorities. What we don't want to see is that helicoptered in and out again. We want to see that capacity building with local people working on local design guides or codes. Interesting point of differentiation there, and perhaps we're not even sure whether they mean a code or a guide. The two are quite different. But that focus on design, the focus on digital, not a panacea, it's not a silver bullet to community engagement. However, the focus on digital and some of the processes involved, getting machine readable information, applications, everything that can be interoperable is a really positive thing. We support that, but there's a bit of a theme here. Again, if it is resourced so that all local authorities can play along in a similar way, and so we don't get the complaints which we all too often hear. There's a lack of consistency between the local authorities, and let's face it, some local authorities are already moving ahead light years in this, and others aren't even at the starting block. So it is going to need a bit of resourcing to help everybody maximise the benefits of digital. However, we are not talking about replacing planners with robots or algorithms. We're talking about some of the back office stuff that could be digitised, should be digitised, but the real heavy lifting on the quality placemaking, engagement, discussions with applicants, with communities, this does actually need people, and it needs professionally qualified people, and we will be making that point very, very clearly. Now, the areas where we've had question marks, and this is really relevant for the topic because we're talking about a planning system fit for the 21st century and beyond. The question marks in no particular order. Well, question mark 1 relates to the big cultural change of the different way of determining applications downstream. Now, you'll be familiar with the 3 areas. We've been asked not to call them zones because the paper indeed doesn't refer to them as zones. 3 areas of growth, which are largely akin to big urban extensions or garden communities, will be pretty much dealt with in the way that they are now, master planned, a lot of work front loaded, and so we're less excited about that. The protect zones are what they say on the tin, broadly speaking. Our only concern perhaps with the protect zones is that some areas who are very good at making the case for enhanced protection may try to protect more of their areas, so there's less land to build on. But if we put that to one side, is this renewal zone is of most interest to us, because this is where we think the most cultural change is coming, that the entire engagement with the community has to be upstream at that local plan stage, at that design stage, design code or guide stage. And then as long as you have developments that are within that, proposed developments that are within the renewal zone that meet those rules, which could have been set a few years before, then it's all systems go. Now, the challenge with that is communities have been very used to, for the last 70 years, getting involved in some of the detail of developments. So that is, there's no getting away from it. It's a major cultural change. Some people may say these are trivial matters, but to communities, things like the location of a bus stop, the treatment of dropped curbs, the availability of school places, these things really matter to local communities. So we are going to be very interested to see how that is handled. And I can tell you in my conversations with councillors throughout England and also MPs, there are mixed views as to whether or not this is a welcome addition, or rather withdrawal part of the process. Some people have been calling for it for years, and other people are extremely worried. The other question we have is in relation to funding of infrastructure. We think the idea of simplifying certainty, not just for developers and landowners, but for communities, is something to be welcomed. You know, it's complicated. And the more complicated you make something, the easier it is to argue your way out of it with loopholes or trapdoors or backdoors. So simplification is all good and well. However, it does appear that some people, some developers, landowners, and even communities quite like something called a Section 106 because it provides certainty that certain bits of kit or things are going to happen at certain trigger points. The other aspect, which it appears, is that the flexibility is such that not only could a local authority decide not to spend the infrastructure levy on infrastructure, they could spend it on anything they want, including lowering council tax, which is quite a good vote winner, I would imagine, timed neatly around a local election. And we would want to see infrastructure money being ring-fenced for infrastructure. And there is no detail or certainty that that would be the case. But there's perhaps even a bigger problem than that. And that's to do with the cash flows, because the way it's currently worded at the moment is that that payment of the infrastructure levy would be upon completion of scheme. Yes, you heard right, completion. So that's okay-ish for something that takes 12 months to build out. When you're talking about 10, 15 years, the assumption is the local authority is going to borrow on that. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm hearing lots of stuff in the news at the moment about local authorities who are really struggling in a financial capacity. It would be an interesting conversation with the Chief Finance Officer to convince her or him that actually, rather than borrow for to deliver some more homes, they were actually going to be borrowing to forward fund some developer infrastructure levy. So we're not sure that's really been thought out, although the idea of simplicity is one to be welcomed. That does lead me on to housing and affordable housing delivery. It's precarious at best, and our worry is it doesn't just stay where it is, it perhaps goes a bit backwards. And what we are looking for is certainty of affordable housing delivery. Many people are looking for certainty of affordable housing delivery. We feel it's too much of a national crisis. It's too nationally significant to be put in the pot of everything else. We've got to find another way of funding genuinely affordable housing. And it can't be right that the majority of social rent these days is actually not provided for by registered providers, but by the private sector. Something's gone very wrong here in how we deliver affordable housing. The experiment of relying on Section 106 has now resulted in so much of it being delivered on 106 that the rest of the pie is much, much smaller. Why does that matter? Well, we've got this thing called net zero, and that's going to require some green infrastructure. So the demand for the cake has gone up, and we're just concerned that something's going to get squeezed out of it. And really nationally, affordable housing is too much of a priority for it to be the poor relation within that. So finally, no, there's two other points actually. One is strategic planning. It's a bit like watching a piece of tumbleweed go up the road. We can't really see much reference to it at all in the white paper. You know, there's a very strong role there for policy and trying to streamline lots of policies and thin out what's in the local plan and get a lot more of it centrally set out, including the housing numbers, which we can come on to, no doubt, in your questions. And then you've got these strong local plans with local design guides. Where is the bit in the middle that involves infrastructure, strategic allocations, interface with huge infrastructure providers, the Environment Agency? It just seems to be forgotten about. So we will be saying something about that in our submission, which segues into the other final point, which is delivering on net zero. We are going to need some consistency at a national level. I've just been with some house builders on my last call. They don't mind bringing forward a new home standard that sets out these clear environmental targets, provided it's a national thing. What they can't live with when it comes to their supply lines, etc., and gearing up for delivery of heat pumps or whatever it is, what they can't live is a patchwork quilt of, well, it's up to you to see how you want to deliver on it. So we've got to be really clear. If we're going to deliver on net zero, we've got to do more at that national level, and we need some really strong guidance, mandated, if you like, out of government as to what is required. Otherwise, we'll just keep sort of drifting on, hoping that one sunny day we can deliver these targets. I'm exaggerating a bit here to be provocative, so I hope I generate some good conversation. So that's a whistle-stop tour through the white paper, if you like. Turning it now more to your region, and looking to the future, I guess from an infrastructure perspective, the future surely has to be bright. You've got a nationally significant infrastructure project making its way up the line to you at some point in the form of HS2. On the face of it, you have a huge commitment from government to level up. By levelling up, my interpretation means investing in more things that drive growth economically in the north. So you can imagine that would be investment in homes, that would be investment in skills, investment in infrastructure, investment in jobs. The trick will be to align the industrial strategy into the growth areas, and ensuring that meets with the housing numbers, as well as those involved in infrastructure investments. And this comes back, if you like, a bit to the regional strategies point I was making, or lack of regional planning. There has to be a mechanism for bringing all of those big investment programs together around one table in a place sense, so that everybody can be rowing in the same direction to broadly the same speed. And what we'll be proposing in our response back to government is a solution for that. I'm not going to tell you the name of it today, because we want to keep our powder dry as we go out with that very public submission. But I think what we'll be saying is, without it, you will have no opportunity to deliver on your levelling up promises. You'll have no opportunity to deliver on your housing and affordable housing. And I would be very interested to hear from those on this call. I didn't crunch the numbers first or check them, how you feel about the new methodology or housing algorithm for delivering homes in this part of the north. I'm more familiar with the northeast side. I did take a look at their figures, and they're obviously over delivering. I mean, what does that really mean in levelling up if you're saying, sorry, we don't need any more homes? What message does that send out? I do think there is a significant opportunity here for the region to be working very clearly on that proposition, if you like, for levelling up. And in some respects, it is happening across the whole of the north via Transport for the North. One of the things that we've said as an institute through our research in the Great Northern Plan, or Great Plan for the North, we did a piece of work with Peter Brett Associates last year. It seems a long time ago now, hence why I've forgotten the exact name of it, but it's effectively saying there's not that there's no point moving forward with the transport plan, but you're not maximising the benefits of moving forward with the transport plan unless you've got the land use wraparound. And it's about joining those dots and making the connections with the investment, with what's going on with other people's investment portfolios. So it's not just transport for transport's sake. And I think now is the time to really get that piece of work going. However, you'll probably laugh at me and say, no, we've got enough on our plate at the moment. We're dealing with a survival and a global pandemic. Well, when I say now is the time, I mean sort of soon, to really set that stall out in a spatial sense, and having that overlay on top. And I'd be delighted if anyone on this webinar is able to tell me that this is all moving forward and that there will be this spatial strategy, this overlay to match the strategic overlay that the Transport for the North has. Because without it, there could be missed opportunities for doing the levelling up and joining the dots with all of the other investment agencies, everyone from Environment Agency to the Highways Agency, the rail providers, but also those other big public commissioners or spenders of money in health and education also. So what was I going to move on to next? So I was going to, I've talked about I've talked a little bit about levelling up. I've talked about the planning system. I think one of the things we may come on to in some questions relates to resourcing. So I won't say too much about resourcing, except for we did develop a comprehensive spending review submission this autumn. It went in a couple of weeks ago, and it was something I was really keen that we did a very robust set of figures, setting out clearly to government what we think they need to do to resource planning now, not in 4 years' time, when all of the primary legislation may be in place and the statutory instruments enacted. And I do hope that they are listening to that. It was a big ask. It was £500 million over 4 years, but actually split up over England, we think it's perfectly realistic when you break it down into the areas that we've asked for. Without it, it's hard to see how you can gear up for recovery and gear up for delivery and gear up for growth. But to flesh that out further, our corporate strategy at the RTPI set out, not only would we do a CSR submission, we would actually create what I've called a Treasury proof business case for planning, and it's called Invest and Prosper. Now, you can't find it yet because we haven't launched it yet, but we have employed internationally recognised Vivid Economics to help us crunch through some Treasury speak figures, which essentially is if you invest Y in planning, you get, this is what you get out of it in terms of the economic benefits, the savings to the NHS, the growth to the economy. And I'm really excited that we're pulling this work together, and we're hopefully going to be publishing it in APPG very soon, because it's very clearly setting out the stall. One of the criticisms, just to wrap this up before we open this up to Q&A, one of the criticisms we've had as an institute very recently is we haven't shouted enough opposition to the government yet on their proposed planning reform. We should be firmer. There's two reasons why we haven't gone out in immediate protest on that. I think one was we wanted to have a big, genuine engagement with our members across England and really hear what they thought first before we shot off too far. The other one is by taking a slightly more measured approach and gaining some facts and evidence, I now feel that we're in a stronger position to not just rebut the planning is broken, but actually demonstrate how we think planning should be resourced in a very fiscal sense, and set the stall out very clearly that we are here to help you, CLG, make a success out of what you're saying you want to do, but you are going to need some help. In the meantime, can we make sure that we resource what we already have, please? Because all of this is going to take a long time. And we now have the Minister on record, quoted just a couple of days ago, acknowledging the amount of time that all of this is going to take. And what I'm going to quote to you, if I can just open it up very quickly, is actually on the public record. I'm not quoting you any secrets from my private conversations with the Minister. I'm going to quote an extract from you of something he said just a couple of days ago, which is, I welcome the input that you and your colleagues will provide to get this right. And I think he was talking to MPs in the House at the time. We're talking about systemic and cultural change about the way we do planning. And sorry, I'm just having to read it. We cannot simply from Westminster snap and legislate and say we've said this and make it so. The 1947 Act, when it was introduced, took something like 15 to 18 years to fully roll out. The 1990 Act took a similar amount of time. 4 in 11 changes still haven't been rolled out from the 1990 Act. If we're going to make this work, we are not talking about legislative change. We're talking about systemic and cultural change about the way we do planning. And he goes on about the need to engage. The reason I'm telling you that is to sort of calm the fears or the flames that this is not a complete overhaul that's going to be delivered overnight. Indeed, if we take the minister at first hand there, that what we're actually seeing is a bit of rolling back, that, you know, the legislative change may be some way off, and we're talking about some incremental cultural change. Well, if that's what we're talking about, then that says to me, not only do they need us, but they might just consider funding us in a way that we really need to be. Now, many of you will be watching this saying, well, you're sounding very local authority-esque there. What about us in the private sector? Well, what I would say to that is half of our members are now private sector, half are public sector. And I've consistently heard from landowners, developers, and private sector members, unless planning works and local authority planning works, none of it works. And so you're only going to get that green recovery if you've got a quick, consistent, professional fleet of foot service ready to go and support things to get them moving. We made it one of our 4 pillars of the corporate strategy, supporting planning services. So we think this is the time to come together as a profession, make that case to government for resourcing. If we can get some of those really big packages of money to local authorities at the time when they need it, as long as they ring fence it, I think we're on to a really positive start to the recovery. So I hope that that's given you quite a bit to think about there. I'm delighted to see there's still 110 of you on the line, which means I haven't upset too many people, or maybe I have. And I just wonder at this moment whether I should pause and ask my chair to rejoin, and we may just think about taking some questions, and perhaps you had some for me first. There may just be a little delay. Otherwise, I can just keep talking for England. Has she gone?
Becky, are you there, Becky? I think she was having a couple of issues with the sound, Victoria, so I think we're just trying to get her back.
Do you want to ask? Did you want to ask me one of Becky's questions so that I can carry on?
Yeah, can we do that in the meantime?
Why don't you do that? Yeah.
I will do that. Yeah. Okay. So Becky will hopefully come back on, but I will ask this question. So the first question was, so the changes currently being proposed by the government to the planning system are vast and far-reaching. The papers are clear that there is a need to improve the effectiveness of the current planning system, along with focusing on ensuring developments come forward where needed. The government is claiming that the changes will create better places to live, work and play. What are the RTPI's thoughts on this?
Well, placemaking and better places to work, live and play. I mean, placemaking is effectively creating places that people want to be in rather than get through quickly or get out of. And we think that the jewel in the crown of placemaking is the local plan. So there absolutely is an opportunity to deliver better places if what is proposed in this white paper is actually what if they're being genuine about that. We do think there is an opportunity here if we're talking about a revamped, well-resourced local plan policy with local plan teams, not just sort of helicoptered in consultants, but people who are actually there, part of the team working on it, working to engage with the community in a really genuine way that they want to do, but perhaps haven't been able to do because of resourcing, then we think there is a real opportunity in that part of it to deliver some better outcomes. I did allude to earlier about the infrastructure. Our worry is, you know, one of the important things for communities in accepting new development is they want to know what benefits it will bring them, what's in it for them, not in a selfish way, but what's in it for their community. And our worry is that the infrastructure levy may not be spent on infrastructure, and that then is not going to deliver to better places or better outcomes. So there is a risk there that won't, unless they tighten that aspect of the proposals. I think the other area I alluded to is this lack of engagement downstream, particularly in the renewal areas, which could be the largest bits of the pie, if you like, that are going to get developed. So we are worried that the lack of engagement downstream could disenfranchise communities and actually see challenges about a cultural change. You know, when people say, but I want to object to my neighbour's demolition of his house and replacing it with the you know, the higher flats, for example. Sorry, you should have had your say 2 years ago when we were doing the local plan. Isn't going to quite cut it. So is that going to deliver better places? Arguably, when people can get involved and discuss and object or contribute and negotiate, that leads to better outcomes because there was a compromise made. Will that level of detail be sorted out upstream? It's going to be a challenge. It is going to be a challenge. Are we joined back by our chair?
I think she's, Becky, are you there? I think Becky might be struggling a little bit. Oh yeah, she's back. Becky, I'm asking the first question. You want to continue?
We've just
Can you hear me?
Yes, we've just done the first question. So we're going to move on to your second question, if that's all right. Unless there's any questions, I hadn't got round to asking if anyone wanted to ask questions.
There is
right, so we're on my second question now.
Yes.
Yes, right. RTPI research shows that in the last 10 years, resourcing in the UK's planning LPAs has been halved. The current changes to the planning system would again have a huge impact on LPA resources, which causes great concern. What are the RTPI's thoughts on this?
Yes, well, you're absolutely right. The huge resources, because there's an element of keeping everything going, and that's going to be, you know, that's taking up existing resources, and then it's preparing for a new system and the work that goes with that. And you just think about the level of engagement that will be needed with landowners, for example, who thought their land was going to be in X designation, but now finds it's going into Y. That's all going to be quite intensive. So we absolutely think there's a need for extra resourcing now anyway, just for steady state. We've set that out in our CSR submission. But looking to the future, this isn't about stripping back planning departments. This is giving a bigger role for them. There's going to be a lot more work to do on design guides or design codes. There's going to be a lot more work to do on the areas. And you know, if all of this is going to generate a lot more growth, then there's just going to be a lot more activity. But a lot of the work that has to be done in advance of having a renewal zone good to go, for example, a renewal area good to go, there's an awful lot of upstream work. The only way I can compare it to is the development consent order, which is intended to nationally to speed down the time from, you know, when the order goes into the decision. but that masks all of the upfront work that was done many years before. So it's all about when you turn the clock on, if you like. So it may speed things up, but it will add, we think it's going to need a lot more professional planners to help deliver a lot of this work. So we're gearing up that future pipeline.
Great, that's really useful, thank you. Just going to quickly go on to the next question. So the next question is, what does the RTPI consider to be the most appropriate step to ensure that the UK planning system can effectively deal with the uncovered insecurity and regional equalities of the post-COVID world?
The most appropriate steps, was that?
Yeah.
I mean, one of them is that we don't feel that the new standard method for housing is going to help with this actually at all. And so I think if we just take one sector, housing, we think that having local areas decide whether that's at a regional or very local level, discuss, but decide that what housing goes where is probably more appropriate than have that set through a central formula. We think that areas such as levelling up in the north, the biggest step is having a spatial strategy, a spatial plan that helps to pull everybody together into a shared vision. Now, it doesn't have to be a statutory document. Indeed, it may not need to be a statutory document, but having that shared vision and then a shared plan of the spatial elements is so important to dovetail into the transport plan, as I was saying, the transport plan for the north, but also to get the other big investors or people who are involved in building things or managing big sites that generate activity. They've got to be around the table as well. So that could be National Grid, could be the education authorities, could be NHS. It could be the transport as well, but having a big spatial approach is the first step really. And the successful places who get their act together can have that comprehensive conversation, if you like, with government on that. Just yesterday I was speaking at an event at Transport for the South East, and that's sort of the bit they're missing at the moment. They've got their transport strategy for the South East, but what they haven't got, when you put the transport investment, then you overlay where the new homes are going, the two don't match at the moment. And it's not rocket science, but it's sort of, you've got to have some convergence of the two. So we do think the first step is a spatial plan, but we would say that, wouldn't we? Because we're planners.
Very true. Okay, that's really, really helpful. Thank you. So the fourth question that we've got, are the RTPI planning on updating its work on strategic spatial planning? If so, this could draw upon recent work done within the RTPI, including that of the Great North Plan and the ambitions work, and on regional spatial planning practice carried out within, in particular, city regions such as the South West and Cambridge, Oxfordshire and the West Midlands.
Yeah, we would certainly like to. What I can't answer you definitively is whether it's in the work programme for next year, but the Great North Plan work was a really great piece of work for the reasons I just set out, really. It just showed the value of having that land use overlay over the top of a transport overlay, with kind of a mission, if you like. And I think perhaps in the past there's been a bit of a resistance to these because people would see, oh, this is, we didn't give any planning power up. I don't think we're talking about giving planning power up. We're talking about giving, having a shared spatial vision. So there's definitely scope to look further at that. There are clearly regions out there that are screaming out for it, quite frankly. West Midlands would be one. I mean, it seems with such a major investment coming into their area in HS2, to not have a spatial strategy across the whole of that growth area seems odd. I'm talking about the southeast also, but there are 7 sub-regional transport boards in England. Where's the equivalent 7 sub-regional kind of land use board, if you like, the planning board? you know, it's a kind of an obvious thing to look at. I'm sure if we're not looking at it, then we should be clear why we're not looking on it. I'll definitely take that back to the team. Yes,
Great.
It's one of our
really
it's one of our it's one of the things that we've been saying a lot about, and we'll continue to say more about it.
That's really good to know. I'm going to go over to the questions from the audience. I didn't miss any, did I, that we did from the audience when I had the technical problem? Or am I okay to go to the audience?
No, Becky, you didn't miss any. No, they're all there.
Perfect. Right, great. So we've got a question that says, do you think more resources should be put into bringing brownfield sites forward? And how could the brownfield sites first principle be made enforceable under the new planning system?
Oh, that's interesting. I think in a way, on just taking it reverse, they're trying to fast track for beauty in renewal zones. And so perhaps that was the intention, is it's a lot easier you can do a permission in principle in a renewal zone if you meet with our design guidelines. Then that's a fast track, and perhaps you could say, well, that's an incentive. Incidentally, by the way, I think we feel that fast track for carbon net zero might be quite helpful as well, rather than just beauty. But yes, absolutely, more should be done for brownfield sites, many of which may already have serviced plots, albeit you know, defunct for some time. And one of the things I think is interesting to look at in terms of the location, if we just take housing numbers, I don't think the housing algorithm has any regard to the carbon footprint, and by that I mean the broader carbon footprint. You know, if you look at proximity to water, which is one of the biggest aspects. If you haven't got water in the right place, you have to spend a lot of carbon moving it around the country. Energy, proximity to building materials. I would imagine many of those sites with lower carbon footprints would be those brownfield sites, because just by virtue of the fact they had something on them previously. And the something they had on them previously probably had some water going into it and some power. And it was probably in a location that made sense for it to be there. So I think there is, of course, they should be prioritised. Will they be prioritised enough through what's on the table? Well, the devil's in the details, been said 1,000 times already with regard to this white paper. I'm not convinced necessarily it will be. However, there is this renewal zone where the intention is to fast track. But it's not fast tracking on the basis of its that necessarily it's renewal. It's fast tracking on the basis that it meets the design code. If that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Got another interesting one here. It says the white paper mainly focuses on housing, but doesn't consider minerals and waste planning, which are essential to delivering the homes needed. Will the RTPI be raising this in their response?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we've got it in there, but hopefully Sarah's taking notes. We can just double check that. I know I've attended at least one roundtable in the regions where this point's raised, and it goes back to my construction point actually as well. You know, it makes sense if you're going to be building things that you might be close-ish towards to where aggregates are. But of course, I think this is in part due to the complete vacuum in there on anything to do with regional level, because minerals and waste is done at a county level. I think it's just sort of been forgotten about in the white paper a bit. So yes, we will be making that point. And it's a really important point. I don't know if any of you know this, but we now run the minerals planning conference with the Minerals Planning Association. We were due to run it this year actually, but for obvious reasons it's been paused. But it is a really big part of the planning ecosystem, and we can't underestimate how important it is in this agenda. So I think if not, we'll make sure it's there, but I'm pretty sure it is.
Great, that's really good. There's also another question about that. It says, the white paper is unclear on what the future of neighbourhood planning will be, and the government is actively seeking views on what it should be. What do you see as the potential role for neighbourhood planning if in a well-resourced and upskilled planning system of the future?
I think our reading of it was that neighbourhood planning was very much part of the future, actually, that they still see a very strong role for it. And I've heard Jenrick talk about this a couple of times publicly. So our reading of the white paper was that neighbourhood planning was very much alive and kicking, and perhaps going to be beefed up even more in this role of local design. And if a cynic there may say, well, that was the sop that they've been given, communities have been given that, whilst the democratic deficit, if you like, has been taken away in the renewal zones for engagement on detailed planning. Instead, you can do the detailed design code for your area. That was our reading of it, but we may have got that wrong. So we think that they're going to be playing a bigger role potentially than they have been. But again, the devil will be in the detail on that.
That's really good to know. A further question we've got. It's great to encourage more resourcing for professionals in planning departments, but how can we get the knowledge into planning committees who often can be the source of problems in delivery of planning permissions?
Well, this is a really interesting one, isn't it? Definitely.
I like that one.
This one's for conversation down the pub, really, isn't it? Let's face it. But I mean, I'll just share with you anecdotally. I was speaking at a councillors association event 2 nights ago. What else would I want to be doing at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday evening? I don't know. But anyway, there I was on a Zoom call with the councillors. It was a Conservative Councillors Association, and there is so much interest in planning at the moment. I mean, normally they get about 50 people along for this, and there was well over 100 of them on this Zoom. And let me tell you, they're not very happy about some of the proposals that are in this white paper. And actually, this applies to all political persuasions. I was speaking to the Shadow Planning Minister and Shadow Housing Secretary of State earlier in the week. You know, we obviously speak to everybody as an institute, and we can't find too many people are particularly happy about the democratic deficit. But turning to your question on training, there has been a bit of a vacuum, we think, on training. It's something I spotted coming into the role is, you know, I've worked with politicians most of my career in some shape or form in local government. When I was in consultancy, still worked with politicians, and then for the Greater London Authority for many years, worked with a lot of politicians. And so coming into this role, I said, well, how do we interface with the politicians? Oh, yes, well, PIPA got disbanded. What's PIPA? Oh, it's a Politicians in Planning Association. Who used to run that? Oh, well, we used to run it and PAS used to pay us, but PAS withdrew the funding because government withdrew the funding and it all fell to one side. And I thought, this is a serious submission. We've got to do something about this because this is our key market for talking to. We know this through our member survey, that members said one of their frustrations is exactly as you've just alluded to, that we don't think the councils understand planning, they're not trained in it, they don't understand where we're coming from, there's no engagement, it's in the way that we'd want, it's all very kind of adversarial on individual applications. So had we not been in the pandemic, we would have been relaunching that network, that association. But this summer, it was my plan to launch it at the local government association. We're going to call it PIPIN, Politicians in Planning Network, to provide them with a home to come into the fold. Let's all talk about our challenges and let us help offer you training, but also let's just have at least one annual event when we could all come together. Now, there's such demand for this, you wouldn't believe it, because it wasn't just me thinking of it on my own. I've been actively lobbied by politicians from Conservative Party, Labour Party, Liberal Democrats. Please, 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 can you reinstate this? So I'm saying on the record, we are going to do it next year. We've made a commitment to it in the corporate strategy. and we would love to be involved with more councillor training, but it all starts with a conversation. And you know, that's where we are. So it won't solve everything. I'm not naive enough to think that all of a sudden all of the challenges that councillors have will go away. But what we're trying to do to navigate through our response to the white paper is ensure they don't get any worse. Because you can just imagine if a community says, you know, this thing's being built next door, how do we object? You can't. That's a huge cultural change. You can't object because it's a politician, it's a not politician in principle, that might be a good one. It's a permission in principle, and it all got agreed 2 years ago in the local plan. So tough. And you may not like the pink facade. Sorry, I'm having fun now, but you know, but it's just, you may not like the Roman column, but that's what it's got. So there we go. It's so I think it's a really good point, and thank you for asking it because it helped me to say something about Pippin.
Good. Good to know.
There may even be some sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So I've got. I think what can be our last question from the actual chair of the RTPI Yorkshire, and he says, "Thank you very much for your excellent overview and presentation. In terms of levelling up, I think it will be crucial to combine new investment in infrastructure, homes and skills with the benefits for the environment and climate. What do you think the government could do to make sure that this happens?"
Well, they need to pivot the investments into the right places. I think having a very clear investment strategy is key. It's just been leaked to the media that there's going to be a new department for investments. It's an approach that the mayor had at City Hall. He's bringing that approach into number 10. So I think engagement with that new department is going to be key. I think enabling on infrastructure, I was actually asked this exact question pretty much yesterday at Transport for the South East, and I was asked, what one thing can we do to help us? And I said, what you need is the borrowing capacity and the borrowing permissions with a Treasury guarantee to enable you to take control of the destiny of the infrastructure that you want to deliver in the region. And an example of that would be the Northern Line extension that's enabled the Battersea development. Whether you like the Battersea development or not, it wouldn't be happening without the Northern Line extension. The Northern Line extension wouldn't be happening unless Treasury had agreed to underwrite best part of £1 billion worth of debt that the two local authorities have borrowed or hypothecated on business rate supplement. So it doesn't matter if you're doing it through whatever tax regime you want to do it through, however you want to borrow it, or maybe not a tax regime, you want to borrow it against some foreign investment, who knows? But having that ability to be in control of your own fiscal destiny, but underwritten by national government, will be a significant opportunity to secure as part of the devolution deals that surely must now be done if this government is going to avoid any sort of revolution with the North, if you like. There's a lot of peacemaking to be done, no doubt, off the back of daily discussions of an unrelated matter, but nevertheless they've shone a lot of light on the sensitivities of the devolution. So I think that ability to borrow money, be able to borrow it yourselves, but have the backing of government in case something goes horribly wrong, will be something that will enable the region to make investments that change the opportunity. If that's helpful, that would be my advice, unless you now say we can already do that, but I don't think you can. Am I hearing any? I think it's a good question though.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think that leads us to being bang on time for 3 o'clock. So I think it's just left with me to say thank you massively for that. It's much appreciated. I think we've had some really good questions and a really, really good debate there, and I think we'll all take away quite a lot from what you've just said. And thank you everybody for attending, and thank you everybody for the time.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and for so many of you staying on the line. There's still over 90 of you on here. One thing I didn't say in the politicians aspect was one of the most passionate politicians that I've met on planning since I've been doing this job was the chair of the planning committee at Sheffield City Council. And he's still on my list of people to bring into Pippin in due course. So, you know, there's a lot of passion up there for planning, and I think it's all within your gift to harness it for the better good, or the common good.
That's good. That's great. Right. Thank you all. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Victoria. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.